Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. This is the Naturalist Capitalist, and I'm Reed Coverdale. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about Tulsi Gabbard because I've got a lot of followers who are big fans of hers, and I was too. And I just want to clear a few things up because on Twitter it's kind of hard to explain in depth the whole story of why I supported her, what I've been disappointed about in her, and what I think of her overall at this point. So I'm gonna preface this by saying that I have changed over the last few months, or a little longer probably. And so some of the criticisms I have of her now, I might not have had of her 9 months ago when I found out about her, because I didn't know who she was till last September. So I think that was about 9 months ago. So I'm not putting this all on her. Some of it is me. Some of the reasons I've been disenchanted are because I have changed. So that's completely fair to note. So before Tulsi, I had, I'd voted for Rand Paul, or supported Rand Paul. He dropped out before the primary in New Hampshire, but I was a big supporter of him, and then of Gary Johnson. But I wasn't what I'd call a crisp libertarian. I always told everybody I was an independent if they asked, and then if they wanted me to go more in depth, I'd say I was a libertarian leaning independent, that I agreed more with them than any other party, but I was not comfortable identifying as a libertarian. So Tulsi was kind of the perfect fit. I didn't necessarily agree with her on everything, but she was independent minded from what I saw. So the first time I found out about her, I was actually driving through New Hampshire last September, and I saw one of her big billboards, and I think I had her face on it, and it said Tulsi 2020. And then I went home and I was watching a YouTube video, and an ad popped up, and it was her, and she was saying that we were being sold a false choice between security and compassion when it came to the border. That we could secure the border, but we could also have robust immigration and immigration reform. And that actually pretty much mirrors my position on the border. It still does. I don't believe in a wall, and she might be a little bit more for some technological security that I don't necessarily believe in, but I believe in sovereign borders, but a very free flow of immigration. I kind of believe in what we have with Canada, like basically a border patrol at the border, but very open travel. I don't think that we need tanks and military vehicles and a wall. I think that's a waste of time. I think the problems go into how illegal immigrants can get hired, and I think that the solution is an economic solution, not a security solution, but that's for another video. So her nuanced approach to border security was just impressive to me, because all I hear is the Republicans saying wall, 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 and then the Democrats just kind of saying open borders, free programs for anyone who comes here, and that's not a real choice. So she had a realistic opinion on that, and I thought that was impressive. So remember, I didn't know anything about her before this. This was the first thing I ever saw. So I went on her website and was looking through reviews, and I thought that they were nuanced in general, and there were some that I didn't agree with, but I thought they were reasonable. And being from New Hampshire and being a libertarian type of guy, the Second Amendment was pretty big on my list. So on her website, there wasn't anything that concerning, but then I looked up some history of some of the bills she had co-sponsored, and that was a little troubling. But then I looked up a bunch of videos that were current on what her views were, and she was saying things that none of the other Democrats were. She was saying that gun violence is not a problem that will be fixed by legislation, and she was really seemingly a big proponent of states' rights for the most part when it came to gun laws. And then the assault weapons ban thing, she had really backed off of. I watched a bunch of her town halls and a bunch of her news interviews, and she never brought it up even. And in one video I saw where it was brought up, she said that it was something we needed to discuss as a country, so she didn't seem sold on any crazy gun control ideas. And then, of course, I agreed with her a lot on, foreign policy, border patrol, the war on drugs. She took a really hard stance against imprisoning people for drugs. She was a big proponent of criminal justice reform. And then some things where she really broke from any of the other Democrats was when she talked about the deficit and the debt. She said those were huge issues that we needed to get under control. And then she was in support of things like school choice and charter schools. And I guess what was really impressive to me was that she was willing to delve into ideas that weren't necessarily politically helpful for her in a Democratic primary. So her views on gun control were one, but another was abortion. She was not giving into the idea of abortion up to birth. She wanted restrictions, and she wasn't shy about it at all. And then going back farther, like to a few years ago, she went to Syria to meet with Assad, and she got all sorts of political backlash for that. And then, she met with Donald Trump after he won the presidency. She got all sorts of backlash for that. And she wasn't seemingly afraid to agree with Republicans out in the open when they had the same views. So that's something I really look for in someone. I'm impressed if someone is into bad politics for good policy. So if they'll sacrifice their reputation to do something that actually helps the people. That's why I really like Rand Paul a lot, because he constantly commits political suicide to stand for his values, and he gets misrepresented a lot. And I was feeling the same way about her. Just completely unbased claims were being laid against her, and I thought, wow, this is someone who will stand up for what she thinks is right. So she came to New Hampshire a lot, but one time in September, I decided to go meet her, and I got to talk with her for probably about 5 minutes or so. And I'm a truck driver, and I'm planning right now on trying to run my own business someday, own my own truck. So I asked her about environmental regulations, because I'm also in support of, a clean energy economy if we can move that way. But I know the Democrats are very unrealistic about it, and I think they focus on a lot of the wrong issues. So I asked her about the Off Fossil Fuels Act, and how we would transition. And she didn't give me some typical political response. I could tell she was really listening to me, and she gave a detailed answer based on my question. And she didn't rush me along, and no one was pushing me to okay, get your question over with. I was just really impressed. It was just kind of one-on-one, and it seemed really sincere. So that was another bonus point on top of that. So surveying the field of candidates, we had Donald Trump, which obviously I would never support him, and then Bill Weld, who, to be honest, if he were the Republican nominee right now, I'd probably vote for him against Joe Biden. But he had no chance because it was just him and Trump, and he's also not very inspiring to me, so I wasn't looking to get behind that campaign too much. So I decided I live in New Hampshire, a small state that has a big voice, so I'm going to jump in and try to make a difference here. So I started campaigning for her. And what was cool was all the people I met were from all over the political spectrum. There were former Bernie people, and there were former, you know, libertarians, former Trump supporters. There were just people from all over the political spectrum who were willing to get behind her. And I thought that was really cool. Um, Something that was weird, and I'll touch on this again later in the video because it ended up being a negative, was that a lot of people followed her because of who she was, not what her views were. And I thought that was weird. I talked to a lot of supporters and asked them, so why do you like her? What do you disagree with her the most on? What do you agree with her the most on? And a response I got a lot was, I actually just support her for her character, or I support her because I think she's a great person. And first of all, I thought, okay, that's a horrible reason, or not a horrible reason, but a horrible way to try to campaign for someone. I mean, I don't know what you're going to tell people when you're out canvassing, but I also thought that it was kind of weird that a lot of these people didn't know anything about politics, but they were supporting her. But at the time, I was like, hey, cool, whatever, as long as you're voting for her, as long as you're trying to get other people to vote for her. So that was in September. I started campaigning for her. And she came to New Hampshire a lot. She came every 2 or 3 weeks. And I remember when she came back the first time, she remembered my name and remembered what we had talked about. And I thought that was really cool because she had met, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people over those few weeks while she was gone, but she remembered who I was and everything. And it was a very close-knit campaign in New Hampshire. There were like, I don't know, 10 or 15 of us who showed up at most of the events. And we all knew each other really well. Some people were from Hawaii. Some people were from New Hampshire. Some people were from Arizona. But we all knew each other pretty well. So it started out really great. And I remember, even though I had some disagreements with her, the more and more I watched her over the first few months, the more and more impressed I became, because she was just willing to talk with anyone. She went on Dave Rubin's show. She went on John Stossel's show. You know, she went on Sean Hannity's show. She went on like all these shows that were from the other side of the aisle. And not just was she, Breitbart too, not just was she willing to go on the shows, but she was willing to point out where she had crossover, which to me was really cool, because it's really cool just to go there, but then to prove that you have some views in common, you know, that's really inviting some hatred from the left or from the mainstream Democrats. So for the first couple months, I was just more and more energetically supportive of her. But then I remember the first thing that was weird to me was the impeachment deal, because initially she was just totally against it. And I'm talking about the Ukraine one. She was saying for like a straight week, you know, this is ridiculous. This is going to be a partisan sham. I don't see any reason to impeach him based on these phone calls or whatever. And then you saw support for impeachment start to grow, especially in the Democratic Party. And then more and more people were getting behind it. And then she changed her mind. And the way she phrased it was, I saw new evidence that made me more skeptical, and I saw some comments from people, and that has forced me to change my mind. And she didn't go into any really specific reasons that her mind was changed. She just kind of gave those vague answers. And I kept trying to find a video where she explained exactly what was disturbing to her, and I couldn't find one. And I was going to ask her in person, but then other things came up that seemed more important. But then, so she kind of took like this centrist position on it, where she wasn't for it or against it. She wanted evidence. And then when the impeachment vote came around, she voted present, which I don't know. I had mixed feelings about it. In one way, it seemed cool because it was kind of spitting in both parties' porridge. But at the same time, it was kind of a way of not taking a stand and not pissing off her right-wing supporters and not pissing off her left-wing supporters. And I loved her censure resolution, by the way. Like, that was great. That was perfect. That's what that's what he should be impeached for war crimes and unconstitutional abuse of the military, and starving the Yemenis people. Everything that she had in her censure resolution was perfect. So I wish that she had pulled a Ron Paul and said, yes, I am voting for impeachment, but not for this. Not for this. It's because of these things. That's what Ron Paul did with Bill Clinton, with the Monica Lewinsky scandal. He voted for impeachment, but he said it was because of, I forget what country we had just bombed, but he said, everyone's talking about the Constitution. This is a much bigger violation. So I loved the censure resolution, but I wish she had, just, to me, the entire deal with the riding the fence and then voting present was just a way of not losing support. But that in itself wasn't enough to dissuade me. But then going back to the gun control thing, in New Hampshire, gun control is a huge issue. I mean, it's one of the biggest Second Amendment states out there. It's like Texas, and it's not really a partisan issue there. I mean, Democrats own AR-15s in New Hampshire. So I actually got a chance to talk with her about it, and I said, look, I'm libertarian leaning, I'm a big gun guy. I'm going to vote for you anyways, because I already have all of these things I agree with you on, but there are a lot of people here who will sit on the couch on February 11th and not bother to vote for you if you're not willing to take a stand on this, because this is something you've kind of glazed over, you've been really vague about. You're going to have to take a stand, and you've co-sponsored some bills in the past that a lot of voters here are not going to be in favor of, and it doesn't seem to be a big issue to you. So if you can really turn this around and promise people that you're going to stand for the Second Amendment, even if it's assault weapons or high capacity magazines or whatever, like, this is all on you. And she was very receptive to that idea, and there were a few other people who were on the campaign. I'm not going to name any names just to keep it all anonymous, but they were working with me on that, talking directly to her. And there were a couple town halls where people actually brought up the assault weapons ban and asked her about it, and she said, that the big deal to her was background checks and that mental health was a problem. And so she basically made it sound like she was moving beyond the assault weapons ban idea. But then some people in the campaign who were up higher, I have the feeling that they didn't like the direction she was going with that, and they tried to shut us down, and they kept us out. And then she actually ended up switching back to saying she did support it in a couple town halls. So there were town halls where she was saying she didn't support it, and then there were others where she was saying she did. And so that to me was kind of weird and not what I was expecting from her. I thought she was a completely straight shooter. I thought she made up her own mind, but it was becoming obvious that even she had politician tendencies to read the room and try to get the best response. So that was kind of concerning to me. Not necessarily because I disagreed with her, but that she wasn't either taking a stance one way or the other, even if it was fine, assault weapons ban, high capacity magazine ban, red flag laws, like whatever. At least just say that's what you think. It was the shifting back and forth that kind of bugged me. And then the other thing was the pedestal approach to everything, kind of like, I always tell the truth. I'm one of you guys. I'm just so much different than everyone else. And it was like, okay, well, you can tell us that, but you really need to show us that. And there have been instances where I've thought that about you, but stop just telling us how perfect you are. Like, show us that you really disagree, because you vote 98% of the time with your own party. And there's been a couple times you've done really courageous things, but I want to know that when you're president, you're not going to approve 98% of Democrat bills. And then some things happened with the debates. She was threatening to boycott the debates, and we were working so hard to get her poll numbers up, and then 2 days beforehand on one of the debates, she said, I'm not going even if I do qualify. And we were all like, okay, what about all this work we've been doing? And then the campaign was just such a mess, especially toward the end as it started heating up. Everyone kept saying, oh, we're right at the point where the numbers are going to go through the roof. Her popularity is going to surge now. But we were still doing house parties in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire was 90% of where she spent her time. And these house parties had 12 people in them. So I remember, I think it was in January, we did it was it was toward the end of December. We did this giant phone call all over the country, and it was just such a mess. No one was disciplined as to when they were supposed to be talking, and then she was supposed to call in, but they couldn't figure out how to connect her phone call. And it was just so obvious to me that the campaign was a complete unorganized mess, and no one was willing to admit it because it was sort of all self-exoneration about the campaign and how grassroots it was and how energetic people were. And I was like, yeah, cool, but we have no organization. You're trying to sell things to a crowd that don't care about how nice you are or how sincere you are. They care about what your policy positions are going to be. And so I actually temporarily left for a couple weeks, and I told everyone, I said, all right, if you guys want to win, you have to convince me that that's your goal. Because right now I feel like this is just an exposure for 2024. And I don't want to, put that much effort into it if that's the case. But I did end up going back in a couple weeks. But every event we went to, she was like an hour late, and we were playing like this really, kind of mushy aloha music at the beginning. And it was just wrong for New Hampshire. And I know she's only run Hawaii election campaigns, but when you're in New Hampshire, you need a different approach. And I tried telling people on the campaign that, and I tried telling her that. I was like, look, she's a badass military woman who, is trained in martial arts. You need to sell her like that. You don't need to sell her like some mushy kumbaya candidate. That's the wrong approach, especially in New Hampshire. This is the live free or die state, very libertarian state, very independent state. Go for the Kamala Harris trouncing style. That was cool. Like that energizes people. But the campaign just wasn't going that way. And then I remember kind of the last straw for me on the campaign was, she wasn't going up, she was going down in the polls, and then she decided to sue Hillary Clinton for $50 million. And it was over calling her a Russian asset. And first of all, I have a ton of moral reasons for being opposed to that lawsuit. I'll just say a couple of them. I mean, it wasn't a direct accusation. It was in an interview where she didn't even say her name. It was obvious who she was talking about. But if we start suing people for stuff like that, how far can that go? Just look at Barack Obama with Donald Trump with the birther thing. He could sue him, and then Rand Paul could sue Lindsey Graham or John McCain, or, you can't make any accusations anymore. And even though that was a stupid, extreme accusation, so what? Like, what about people running against Hillary Clinton with what they were saying about her emails or Benghazi? If that lawsuit went through, it would be abused by the powerful elite politicians. And then if you were in a debate trying to go against them, what are you going to be confident saying going forward? Because you don't have 100% evidence of anything, So to me, it was a joke. It was a joke because it would get thrown out. But if it somehow went through, it would be terrible. And then on top of that, it was just all for attention. That's all it was. Because look, I'm going down in the polls. I need some dramatic thing. And I just wish she had done it on something policy related instead. If she had really made a stance on gun rights or something that was controversial, like she had been doing, that would have given her headlines, that would have helped her in New Hampshire. But, I think that was the wrong move. So after that, I actually stopped campaigning for her actively, and that was a few weeks before the New Hampshire primary. And then the primary rolled around. I did vote for her, and publicly, I was still, fully supportive of her because I still thought she was the best candidate. I had a lot of um, disagreements with her, but I kind of kept them close to the chest just because I didn't want to discredit her. And then, she moved on from New Hampshire, and I was still advocating for her. And then she stayed in, and I was like, okay, that's cool. I don't really see where this is going. And then she dropped out when the coronavirus hit, and she endorsed Joe Biden. And I was a little disappointed that she didn't just suspend without endorsing anyone, because I wouldn't have been happy with Bernie either. But I was okay with it. I was like, all right, whatever. This makes sense. She's dropped out. She's endorsed Biden. Whatever. It sucks, but it is what it is. So I started looking into the Libertarian Party. I found out a little more about Jacob Hornberger. Then she went on Jimmy Dore's show to explain herself, and something was different about her. And I know this is what everybody thinks, but it's really how I thought. Watching her answer his questions, she suddenly didn't sound like the Tulsi Gabbard I thought I knew, especially when she was talking about foreign policy and the military and how we do still fight wars that are worthy of our service. I was wondering what wars. And so after that interview, I did start criticizing her publicly. And this was where all the people who supported her because of who she was instead of what she represented started turning on me. And they started going insane. And I wasn't saying I hated her or anything. I was just saying I don't approve of her, the latest things she's been saying. And I just got so much vitriol for it. And that made me realize that the things that I had thought were positive about her might have been some negatives, and that was that she was attractive, well-spoken, young, warm, just like all these things that I thought were great because they could attract people. What I realized is the people that actually cared about that, most of them, that was all they cared about, and they didn't care what she did. So then she stopped attacking the establishment after she dropped out, which was kind of disappointing, because she had just been pumping it out like every few days. She was saying something about, how the Democratic establishment was corrupt, and she stopped doing that. And then the only time she broke silence was to either advocate for some bullshit stimulus bill that was going through, or to criticize Mike Pence for not wearing a mask, or to talk about how we needed contact tracing and we needed more federal government control of, masks and everything. And I just really don't agree with that. And this is where I started changing too. I started watching how the stimulus bills were coming through, and then I started listening to some different economists. I was listening to Jim Rickards and Peter Schiff, and I was just unimpressed with how she reacted to all these bills. The CARES Act, I realized she didn't vote for it, but she was pushing for it on social media, doing videos talking about how we needed those things that were in there. And I totally agreed with Thomas Massey that was just the cheese in the trap to get representatives to vote for something that would give their constituents just a little piece of gold. And she was seemingly cheerleading the Democratic establishment. And so bill after bill came out that she just kept pushing for. And I was like, wow, this is not the person I thought she was, because I thought she was going to be willing to commit political suicide to vote against a bill that was crap, like Thomas Massey did. That's who I thought she was, and she didn't do it. And then I started thinking back to some of her policies and realizing that she was willing to commit political suicide for foreign policy legislation or foreign policy meetings. She wasn't willing to do that with economic policies that could be perceived as hurtful toward the people. So uh, things like the minimum wage or free college, like there's no way she'll ever oppose those, even though the minimum wage crushes job opportunities for low income people. Doesn't matter. Like she'll never oppose it because that would be political suicide, but it's suicide against a populist economic message. And I realize she's never going to do that. She's not doing it now. This is when it's most important. She's not going to do it at all. I think there were like 4 or 5 bills she co-sponsored that were just complete crap, and most of the money didn't go to helping people anyways. It either went to state governments or corporations, or very very little of it was cash relief to people. Um, and then she co-sponsored the Trace Act, which a lot of people are saying it's getting overblown, which I think it is. But the problem with legislation, if you haven't noticed, is when it leaves things open to interpretation. That's when you have to watch out, because Washington will always abuse that. If there's any, even when there isn't room, they still abuse it. So when you write legislation, it has to be very specific. And that bill is not specific, and it has to do with tracing people, and it has to do with hundreds of billions of dollars of funding over multiple years, possibly. Has a really terrible sunset clause. The protections in it are not very comforting. So I was really that one I was actually surprised to see her support. And then she dropped her case against Hillary Clinton, and as I said earlier, I was against that anyways. But to me, that just solidified the idea that that was nothing more than an attention grab. And now I have to fall in line with the Democratic establishment, so I'm not going to make any more waves. And so she's kind of dead to me right now. And as I said, I have changed over the last few months. My position on some economic things have changed. Like, I was sort of open to some sort of Medicare for all if it was intelligently designed. At this point, there's no way, just because I've seen how utterly irresponsible the government is with doing simple tasks. And I already sort of felt that way anyway, but this just solidified it. At this point, I identify as a libertarian. I'm much more comfortable saying, no, we need less government. We need more capitalism. I'm completely fine with saying that now. And maybe 9 months ago, I wouldn't have been as stalwart in that approach. So I don't hate her. I still don't. What sucks is I really did believe in her more than anyone else, even though I agreed more with Rand Paul. She was like really real to me when I first found out about her, and I met her and listening to her talk, seeing her emotional responses with people in town halls. I was just 110% in on her, even though I didn't agree on everything. And so seeing someone that genuine and seemingly perfect fold to the establishment maybe hurts more than it would with anyone else. And I do hold her to a higher standard than other people because she claimed to be so much different, and I thought she was. And I do hold politicians I support to a higher standard. I hold Rand Paul to a higher standard than I do Mitt Romney. I don't care what Mitt Romney co-sponsors, because it wouldn't shock me if he did something bad anyway. Where if Rand Paul voted against the War Powers Act or something, I would grill him alive for that. So I don't know. I'm going to have to see what she does in the future. I don't support her anymore. I don't think I would support her as a Democrat again. One of the reasons I did this time was because the other options were so terrible. But if Rand Paul were to run as a Republican, or if Justin Amash could prove that he could win as a Libertarian, and she was the Democrat, I probably wouldn't support her. I would love to meet her again, and I'd love to ask her some questions and talk to her about all this, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I don't see that's going on behind the scenes. But people got to remember, when you're supporting someone, you have to support them based off of what you know. You can't just write off an excuse for every time they do something you don't like and say, well, I don't know the whole picture. No shit, you don't know the whole picture. But the reason you supported them in the first place was because of the picture you do have of what's going on. So when somebody starts going against what you expected them to do, the responsible thing to do is to challenge them, and ultimately, if they keep doing it, to say, okay, I'm done. And so that's where I am now. She's going to be leaving Congress here. I don't know I don't know what her plan is down the road. I don't regret supporting her. If I had to do it over again, I probably wouldn't campaign for her, knowing the end result, but I probably would vote for her in the Democratic not in the Democratic primary again, because I still do think she would have been the best option out of everybody we had. But she's not the staunch anti-establishment, freedom fighter that I thought she was. And what's more concerning than the way she's acting is how her supporters are acting, because a ton of them are just completely brainwashed, and whatever Queen Tulsi wants is what has to happen. And I saw that in the campaign. Now that I look back and see how they're acting now, I can see hints of it before, because of how staunchly supportive, regardless of what she did, I'm supporting Tulsi because of who she is mentality. That's really not good. I mean, that's what Trump supporters are. Trump supporters support Trump no matter what he does. So, yeah, that's my Tulsi story. Sorry that was kind of long. I don't expect everyone to watch all of that, but if anyone's really wondering, that's how I feel. Okay, thanks, guys. Tune in next time. I'll catch you later.